Welcome to Kaizen Time, part of the Blood, Sweat, and Business podcast, where we provide constant improvement to businesses through timely, actionable financial solutions. Do you want answers to your financial questions? Email us at bsp@kaizencpas.com. I'm your host, Mark Valesky. Now let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Kaizen Time. I'm joined by Brian Bright, Director of Payroll Operations. Brian, do you have like a checklist that you do every day? Or something like where you're like, I need to do this to have a successful day. Year.
Yeah, we have a couple of checklists at YPD. One's for a management one, which is a little more like auditing wise. Like, did I check this? Did I check that? And then the team has a processing checklist for the day. Like, do we, put paper in the machine, stuff like that, just to make sure that we do have a smooth operation.
Okay. I feel like checklists like that are essential for virtually everything these days, businesses and payroll included, because again, payroll and compliance, big thing, have to do it, got to stay with it, and it's always changing.
Yes.
So what are basically some things that people should have on their checklist to make sure they're staying with payroll? And
Sure. So like, we have suggestion for HR and payroll departments. A lot of clients are smaller, so sometimes it's a payroll department of one, right? Or maybe it's an owner. They might need a little help with some of that stuff. Or maybe you're hiring a person and you want them to look at something with fresh eyes, like what they should review. So every January, we kind of have a list of things that we really suggest that you look over, right? So the first thing is your employee handbook. Updating your employee handbook for January is a really good idea because that's when things can change, right? You can see new leave policies for the states. Maybe they have a new accrual or PTO policy.
And most of these policies are coming out in January.
Yeah, they come out usually November saying, okay, January 1, it starts. So you start to see it. You want to use a payroll system or an HR system where you can launch a handbook to them digitally and then they can read it and sign off on it. So that you're not making, changes and trying to collect all these physical documents and things from people.
And then you got to file them and hold them for however many years.
Yeah, 7 years usually. Some of that stuff, yeah. So if it's in the payroll, it's a little bit easier, right? And, there's Illinois is where we're in. There's like 15 leave policies, right? From domestic violence survivors to pregnant or maybe active duty military. So it's not necessarily like you have to like pay them for not being, but usually have to say their job or give them time to do things. So this is a great time to make sure you have all those policies in place where your employees can access them, right? So saying, all right, here's our pregnant leave policy, right? Here's our policy on FMLA. Having all that in the employee handbook is really good. The other thing to look at too is, labor policies versus a payroll policy, right? A payroll policy might be internal. You might pay holiday hours, but that's not required, versus a labor policy that, is like our overtime is time and a half. You have to at least pay that. Right. So making sure that you have those policies clear in place that the employees can read them and understand them is really, really important.
Well, and I will say this, putting together the employee handbook, making sure it's up to date, saves everybody some headache, right? One, you're being compliant. Two, your employees know what to expect from day one.
Yes.
Okay? Not that, hey, you went through all this effort to hire somebody, interview them, get them trained. 2 weeks down, they're like, well, this doesn't make any sense. This is what I was told. And then they're gone. And
right.
Now you're back to, hey, I don't have an employee. All those 2 weeks of training have gone like completely, down the toilet. Like It's saving everyone some headache by having an up-to-date employee handbook.
Right. And there's a lot of things out there. A lot of services. YPD has a service for a handbook if you need help. Most of the major providers do too. So they'll help get you at least compliant in one state. And it's usually pretty cost effective. And so it's really, really important to go through that process. The other thing to look at is pay dates and pay periods. Once you kind of lock these in, you're okay. They don't change very often at all. But a lot of times when clients come to us, especially if they were smaller, they might not necessarily be compliant, right? They might do something like pay current, right? Where they're all salary. And so they pay for work Monday through Friday. They pay for work on Friday for that week. They're not in arrears. You hire somebody hourly, then that's kind of a problem, right? You need some time there. So once you kind of lock those in, it's good, but it's always good to review them, make sure they're compliant. So like, is your pay period long enough? Is it the right size? Are you being paid within so many days at the end of the pay period? Are you paying frequent enough? What is like your 7-day pay period for your overtime? Right? Are you a Monday to Sunday place, or are you Saturday to Sunday? You have to kind of make that decision and stick with it. So it's really good to review it.
So, but essentially it's kind of like a set it and forget it. Once you're kind of set, unless something dramatic changes, it stays the same.
Right. It's going to stay the same, but let's say you're a new person coming in, you should probably review this because you don't know if they did it right the first time. Right. So it's really, really important just to be like, all right, our pay period is good. Is there something that come up? Because I'll tell a story about it. Right. There can be state exceptions. So there was a Dairy Queen in the state of New York that paid biweekly. Pretty common. I've seen it around a lot of restaurants, that kind of stuff is weekly. But if you're like an ice cream store, you have a lot of seasonal help biweekly. I've seen it, right? Well, New York, if you work at a Dairy Queen, that's considered a laborer.
A laborer.
And so you have to pay laborers weekly in the state of New York. So they got sued. They'd operated like this for years. So they got sued. So they had to go back like 6 or 7 years. And they had all these kids that worked there because it's a Dairy Queen, right? They're open in the summertime. Mm-hmm. And they pay them bi-weekly in the summertime. So you have all these kids that work there as part-time jobs that they track them down and get them part of this lawsuit and then like figure out their hours and all this stuff. And they had to pay a big fine to the state for not paying soon enough.
So in reality, it's not that they weren't paying them,
correct,
right? They were getting paid correctly the dollar value, but they weren't getting paid weekly because they are classified as laborers. Right.
So that's why it's always good to review it because they've been operating this way forever. And then somebody saw a check stub and was like, hang on, this isn't right. They got paid correctly. They got paid overtime correctly. They got all the money they're supposed to pay. They just weren't paid frequent enough.
And then, so again, the city fined them when they found out.
Right.
And then they had to go back and pay an additional.
Yep. Penalties. Right. Yep. And so that's not a payroll issue. It's actually a labor issue. Right. Compliance. Yep. So it's just, it can be complicated. So that's why it's always good to review, even if like it's a set it and forget it kind of thing. Like, hey, did something change?
Well, no one really thinks of, hey, I'm working at Dairy Queen and I'm falling into the labor, being into a labor group. Cause you think of that, you're like, what? That's a factory worker. That's a carpenter.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And you're like, I hire a bunch of high school kids in the summertime. It's just,
it's a part-time gig.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. So common payroll mistakes, not including Dairy Queen.
Not including Dairy Queens, yes.
That is a huge outlier.
It is, absolutely is. So common payroll mistakes, we talk about a lot, 1099 versus W-2. Is this so important that unless you know for a fact they're 1099 contractors, pay them W-2. Another thing is not reconciling the payroll register. So a couple of things that folks don't do is compare it to some of their expenses. So for instance, looking at a payroll register to make sure you're taking enough deductions to cover your medical insurance is really important. Sometimes people, it depends how they classify it. Sometimes they classify medical as an expense instead of like a GL line item. And so they're not comparing, oranges to oranges for what their bill is. They're just expensing the bill and putting this as expense offset and being done, which is not the best way to do it.
Okay.
So this reconciling, make sure it looks right to you, right? Are you paying enough in taxes? Are you paying people correctly, the correct hours? And so GL coding is really, really important. I really suggest a robust GL. So that's your general ledger, making sure that there's a general ledger report with your payroll provider that has all the dollars that you paid in that payroll into the right buckets. That'll help you with things like 401k, making sure you have the match that evens out to what you debited out of your cash when you pay it, your deductions like medical, things like that. So that's a pretty common thing we see a lot with the payroll register, trying to review like, hey, did I capture everything in how does that affect the rest of my books? Right. It's really, really important. The other thing is not reviewing exceptions or change audit reports. So a lot of systems will have like, here's what changed since last payroll. We review that at YPD. Every CSR before they process it reviews it to make sure it makes sense. And if there's something, we question it. With some industries, they don't give you that, right? So having any kind of audit report, just double checking is really good to do.
And that's one of those things where you stay on top of it every week. And if you do that, it's easy to do. If not, it's overwhelming.
Yes, correct. And then, Jan 1, deductions change, 401k can change, making sure you have a plan for updating that information. So that like when you get your new benefit amounts, you actually deduct the correct amount from the employees.
So what you're saying is, hey, 401k limit has changed this year, making sure that is then updated into the employee handbook.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone is aware of this change.
Right. Or you're somebody that maxes out their 401k every year, that you increase your contribution so it maxes out.
Makes perfect sense. Yep. Okay.
And then the last is, having a plan for your year end, right? So employees always are going to ask about when they get their W-2. They probably start asking about it in December after their last check. So
Brian, when are you getting your W-2, by the way?
So ours will probably be available after the 15th of January, before the 20th.
Okay.
So knowing that information is really, really important, and how they're going to get it, because they're going to ask you.
Yeah.
So being prepared with that information is really, really important. When do you review benefits, right? So you usually want to work back. So if your period is January 1 where your deductions change, yeah, you can do an open enrollment in December. But sometimes you don't give people enough time to decide. So deciding, okay, I'm going to change Jan 1. Maybe we do open enrollment end of November. I need to start looking at plans in August. So kind of knowing when you want to start reviewing your benefits is really, really important. So a lot of people do it too late, and then they're kind of stuck with what they have.
And by that, when you say a lot of people, you're talking about the people who are in HR for the business.
Correct. Yep. And then last day change 401k deductions. Sometimes it's on a weekly basis. You have to do it by Tuesday. So you can't do it Wednesday after payroll's process and won't take effect. So knowing that, it's always good. When they enter or exit the plan. So is it upon termination, 30 days after? So knowing that's really, really important, so you can process that correctly on your end. And then when does your provider need their information locked in? So let's say you have a service provider. When do they want the information? So like for us, it's 12/31 is when it locked in. Now we don't black out until like the 6th or 7th of January. So if you have to fix something and you reach out to us, we can get it done. But after the 6th or 7th, you're locked down. If we have to change something, then we just have to amend it and change it. And there's charges for that. So knowing when you have to have all your stuff finished and finalized is really, really important to avoid any kind of issues.
What would you say the biggest, you have this huge list.
Mm.
What is the biggest mistake people make with payroll and their foundations of payroll?
So I really think understanding how payroll relates to their business is the biggest thing, right? So when you look at it and you look at payroll as a huge expense, right? Okay, sure, it can be. It is big, but how does it affect your payroll, right? Like, what's the expensive part? Is it a certain department? Are you small as a certain person, right? Are you comparing your like revenue, right? And your business needs to what you have, if they're maybe they're a non-value add role, right? Like, I'm the director of the department. So nobody really wants to talk to me or deal with me, right? Because I'm there to oversee everything. They don't pay that. They pay for the CSRs to give them great client service, right? Mm-hmm. So, it is what I make attached to like the goals of the company. So knowing how your payroll relates to how you want your business to process and go forward and be successful is really, really important.
That's interesting. And I don't think enough people really look at it from, people like to say 500 feet up.
Right. They look at the expense like, oh, my payroll costs $3,000. I mean, we're even guilty of it too, right? We review a payroll summary with the client, like, here's how much your payroll costs you. Sometimes we don't dig down enough to be like, your labor report showing this department's costing way more than this. Does that make sense?
Yep. And that's where other people come in. Like, for example, we have people who help businesses and audit them and look at those individual things. That's good to know.
Yep.
All right. Thanks so much, Brian.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
You've been listening to Kaizen Time, part of the Blood, Sweat, and Business podcast. If you like what you heard, subscribe and leave a 5-star review. This podcast has been brought to you by Kaizen CPAs Plus Advisors, providing advisory and accounting services to help you grow your business. Learn more at kaizencpas.com or email us at bsb@kaizencpas.com.